I have to thank the conveners for this invitation. And I have to tell you that I'm going to change not the title. I will stick to the title, but I will change the content entirely. And when I told that, that was a decision I made about 24 hours ago. And when I told it to Regine last night, she looked a little bit irritated. I didn't tell her what I'm going to do. She looked irritated, but did not say no. So I had, for the next step, I had to inform my co-author. And he just stoically said, it's your choice. So in order to put the responsibility fully to my shoulders, I put his name under brackets. Which key do I use to proceed? This one? Okay. Now, in order to tell you what I planned to say was that I wanted to introduce this wonderful result of an exceptional community effort, the Randolph Glacier Inventory, showing here these almost 200,000 yellow dots, each one being a glacier, each one having its macro-scale catchment area and what people can do with it. And Matthias has just given it is a brilliant illustration of what we can do with this new tool. Next, I was about to elaborate on how difficult it was to maintain this figure in the chapter 4 of the IPCC report, and how happy I am still that it is there, because it is exactly to be used as I use it here. It's not to show you details, but it's in order to show you how scattered our knowledge and understanding of the past, of the most recent past of glaciers in different regions on Earth is and still is. Now, by just using the law of the big numbers, there is something, a lot of things which we can do with these glaciers, and among other things, it is just the blue line, which shows how the anthropogenic causes of the glacier retreat have increased, and now for all glaciers worldwide, it's about 70%. The rest is still a recovery from Little Ice Age. Then I was about to extrapolate a little bit in these different regions where glaciers contribute to water issues, and that has nicely been done by Walter and also by Matthias, so there is no big bad things that I do not go into it. And then I also wanted to get a little bit into the dividend contribution of glaciers, terminus, which was originated by David Collins about 20 years ago. It shows on the left side how the glaciers would contribute if they were in balance, and the right or the red numbers in the altitude, how they contribute to the glacier runoff or the water availability in the present day imbalance of the glaciers. Also something that Matthias has nicely covered, so there is no big deal. At last, I wanted to go into these details of glaciers contributing finally as little catchments, one by one, hydrological catchments to the sea level rise, and just point your attention to the biggest error bar they still cause, or the biggest uncertainty they still cause. But then something came up which I was not expecting to be part of it, but finally I got an invitation to attend the UNFCC Conference of Partners number 20 in Lima, which took place from December 1st to 14th, and finally it ended only on December 16th, that was last Sunday. It was composed by negotiations and side events. In the center are the negotiations by the different delegate groups from different, actually 195 countries, and hundreds of side events. And these side events, they are somehow making the atmosphere there, and I do believe that they make a little bit of a pressure also to the negotiators. And these side events are made up by colorful groups of indigenous people just playing on their drums, but also by people, big numbers, big figures like Leonardo DiCaprio and John Kerry and Ban Ki-moon, and you may name them. A lot of people were there, and I had the opportunity to contribute to 4 of these side events, and not in the first week when all the other big people were there, all the big people were there. I was a very small one, but I had the opportunity to be at the very end, toward the end of the second week there, when all the others had left. And so just by chance I had decided not to spend these 2 days off in San Francisco here, but I decided to stay in Lima, and I went into the plenary sessions. That was for the first time that we as observers were allowed to attend the plenary sessions. where most of the negotiations took part, and that was highly interesting, and I decided I tell you about, because the media did report in an entirely wrong way about what happened there. And just to give you a little bit the background, the ultimate objective of the convention, of this UNFCC convention, is put down in its Article 2, and it says it is the stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interferences with the climate system. And that should be done within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally, to ensure food production is not threatened, and enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. That is well said, and this is also something which is clear, and everyone agreed upon that 20 years ago when it was set down. And then over years and years, nothing seemed to move. Nobody seemed to move when finally, shortly before Lima, which is Lima was in order to put down the agenda for the next session, which is in Paris 2015, and that is to replace the Kyoto Protocol in a much better manner as the Kyoto Protocol was able to do. So the European Union came in October with a pledge on reduction of greenhouse gases. China and the United States finally followed and gave up their accusing each other for not doing anything, and that was really a big step forward. And then many other nations have still to get in, but the three big polluters, so to say, but also the richest among us, they came in with that. And so that created a really kind of an atmosphere of big hope. It was actually that everyone thought, now we are not following this emission scenario anymore, which leads up to 4 degrees Celsius by 2100, but we may turn into that, what leads us down to the 2 degrees Celsius, and the respective forcing scenarios here, the RCP 8.5, 8.6.0 and so on, down to 2.6, the 2.61, the one which actually needs to have a little bit of negative emissions shortly before 2100, but would keep us within these 2 degrees Celsius. So a big hope in the whole community was there, and there was a text laid out, and that stood there for almost the entire 1.5 weeks or even beyond. And everyone agreed that all parties, and finally all parties, and not different kinds of parties, adapt to a protocol, another legal instrument, or an agreed outcome with legal forces. This is UN language. And they agreed to reduce their emissions. So it was all upon mitigation. But then, with the time coming, and it was only toward the end of this week, the disenchantments arose slowly, gradually. The first one was that, of course, if we now reach this 2 degrees target, we may be able to keep the temperatures stable within the 22nd century. We may be able to keep the sea level, the sea ice extent stable within the 22nd century. We may even recover a little bit the pH, the acidity in the oceans, and keep them stable if we go along these blue lines here. But the oceans would not follow like that. They have a memory. They have a very long memory, and they would keep growing. And even with the 2 degrees Celsius, we have to count on several numbers of sea level rise in certain areas of the world. It is not in the next century. It is within 30 generations, people say. But that is something which is committed already now. And if we go to the 2 degrees Celsius target, we would just be very bad off. So that is actually not a target to be met. And it was just a hot potato we just handled around without looking deeper into what this 2 degrees Celsius means. And some groups even came up, now we have to go for the 1.5 degrees Celsius. It was, first of all, Evo Morales just shouting it to the world without offering a way how to do it and without offering any contribution to that. But it was on the platform. And when then people started to count all these pledges and calculate it into the emission scenarios and into the finally also temperature scenarios, they found that with all these big groups coming in, there was no way to go below 3.10 degrees, the second disenchantment. And nobody knows how to go down to 0 degree, to 2 degrees, because if all the others come in, we may get down to 2.5, but never to 2 degrees Celsius. And then there was a third enchantment, because then finally people realized that all was only about mitigations. And mitigations means that this is done by the rich countries. And the rich countries, my analogy was then, and it is a bit of a subjective view, but I had a lot of discussions with delegations. They thought mitigation is something which the first world countries or the first class would do in order to save the first class tech. That might be a chance, with the help of the second class and the third class maybe for a little while. But there is no way to save also the third class. And so the third world came up and said, look, you have forgotten about adaptation measures, you have forgotten about the loss and damage measures, and you have forgotten about the transfer of knowledge and the transfer of technology, and you have forgotten about telling us exactly with high transparency in the numbers how much money you provide for us, and not just letting us help you for the first thing and then stepping on our fingers so that we will fall down. And so the entire text had to be reopened again. And I think it was at the end a big, big success that they did not go for this first world only solution with the mitigation only solution, because it was very much on the edge in that. And it's still a threat that in Paris they may not be able to find a solution altogether, and then the G20 will leave the G77, as they call them, the big group or the powerful group of the G20, and the 77 are the least developed countries. They may leave them behind and do their own solution, which I think is a really big threat and a difficult thing. So Lima was a success. It was a great success. It was very wrongly transported by the media, but it is a success that tells us how far we have gone already. And it was only the last IPCC report which showed that we are in the middle of the climate change. That's not something which is coming somewhere in the future. It happens now. And so the people are really nervous there. And my impression was they do even panic. And they do not know how to get out from that. So this is the way. It's many ways to go from Lima to Paris. It's also, this is the setting as our Earth is. This is where, the way to hell. This is the way to heaven, as some people put it. And it is a matter where you find or where you think we are. I think we are somewhere here. Other people are a little bit more optimistic and say we are here or here. From Lima to Paris, the way is tough negotiations. They will meet again in January, in February, in March. They will hopefully bring in a lot of new pledges, and there might be a way toward Lima, at least to save the whole thing jointly, or to take it forward jointly, and not just by one group, which I think would be the worst case scenario. And immediately after not doing anything. And just getting back to the topic of our session here, I would say it is highly important to do these adaptation studies. And you do adaptation studies here, particularly in the third world countries. The Himalayas are among them, the Andes are among them, and a little bit of a positive message, which is not so easy in these circumstances. Or at least tell you, young and mid-aged scientists, you should make yourself available for this 6th assessment report, which most probably is going to be organized very soon. Make yourself available, if not as lead authors, so at least as contributing authors, and speak out loudly, not in a wrong way. Do not exaggerate. This is more damage than not saying anything, but speak out loudly and get pre-assessments ready for the next IPCC report. It's nothing worse for lead authors to just put bits and pieces together which do not fit into each other. You as a core group should get together and do pre-assessments for different regions on different topics, and that is how I end my talk, else I would irritate Regine even more. Thank you very much.